The title of our topic tonight is Safely Navigating the Falling U.S. Dollar. I just want to ask before I begin, who here has a 401k or an IRA or a pension fund, retirement savings that you're responsible to manage? Okay, good. That's very helpful. And how many people here are familiar with publicly traded stocks and bonds? Okay, good. That's very helpful. And how many people here are concerned with the falling U.S. dollar? Well, in fact, and we'll get there before the evening is over, but who's more concerned about a U.S. dollar that doesn't fall? If you're an activist and you want to see peace in this world, what's keeping the dollar up? War, coercion, drugs. Okay, so we're between a rock and a hard place. If the dollar stays up, it could be worse. So, what I want to talk about today, I'm going to talk for about 55 minutes, and then we'll go to Q&A. Because I find, particularly when I'm in this area, I love to do interactive conversations. I want to use as a vehicle to talk about investment strategy and economics. I want to use as a vehicle a prototypical American family. So I'm going to introduce the American family first. I'm going to talk about what I refer to as tapeworm economics. Who here has ever heard me talk about or read the tapeworm? Okay, I have a wonderful friend who's an alternative healthcare practitioner, and she explained to me one day that a tapeworm, the way a tapeworm operates in your body is it injects into your system a chemical that causes you to crave what makes the tapeworm stronger and you weaker. And so you feed the tapeworm, and the tapeworm grows stronger, and you grow weaker. Now, and I listened to her. I was lying on the table as she explained that, and I said, oh, that's what I mean when I say a negative return on investment economy. That's the American economy. So we're going to talk about tapeworm economics. Then I want to discuss a little bit about as an investor or just as a person managing, because the most precious investment we ever make is our time. Okay, who do we live with? Who do we share our time? Who do we give our attention to? So when I talk about investment, I mean all your resources, whether it's your health, your time, your attention, your financial assets, anything. I want to talk a little bit about where we are in the landscape and what the future may hold. And then I want to talk about investment, a short-term investment strategy. I used to have a partner who used to say, to be a hero, we must first survive. So the question is, Christine and I sat down, Peg, right after the election. Was it after the election, or when was it? No, it was right before the election when we were worried. And she said, okay, let's cut to the chase. What do we do real fast? So we want to talk about investment strategy, and then I want to talk about longer-term opportunities to really shift wealth. Now, everything I talk about tonight is written up in articles. And if you go to my website at www.solari.com, you can link to the Solari Action Forum. And in the Solari Action Forum, there is a forum called Solari Investor Circles. Okay, a Solari Investor Circle is an investment club that helps people move their investment of both time and money back to basics, including local investment. So some of the strategies I'm going to talk about tonight are going to be part of the Solari Investor Circles, which we're launching in January. At that forum, there's a topic called Workshop Resources. And for all the different sections that I talk about tonight, there are links and links to some questions about investment strategies, articles. So that's a complete compendium of articles and informations and links that will cover in greater detail the different things that I talk about today. Okay? Also at Solari Action Network, you can sign up for updates. So if you want to stay current on what we're doing when we come to the Bay Area, it's all there. So it's www.solari.com and then Solari Action Network. Let me describe this family. Bill is 58. He's an accountant in a large accounting firm. He's got 2 years to retirement. His wife is Alice. She's 57. She's a former librarian, mother of 3 grown children. Joey, their oldest child, is a tax accountant who works at a large investment advisory firm. Actually, we had this as a family who lived in Sonoma, and Joey lived in San Francisco. He's been married for 2 years. He has 1 child. The second child is Dave. He's 31. He's an environmentalist and works at a small not-for-profit focused on renewable energy. He's married to a coworker, and they want to have kids. Liz is 29. She's the third child. She went to University of Texas. Liz is a minister for the T.D. Jakes Prison Ministries in Dallas, Texas, but she spent time in Peru, where she watched the tapeworm rape Latin America. What is this family's major concern? Well, let's look at their financial portfolio. For those of you who have the handout, and I'll read for those who don't. Bill and Alice have a home that's valued at $650,000. They've been blessed by the mortgage bubble over the last 10 years. The value of their home has gone up a lot. They have a $250,000 mortgage, which they increased in size about 7 years ago to help finance tuition for their kids. College and graduate school tuition was a major hit. They have about and it's a variable rate mortgage. They have about $20,000 in auto debt. No credit card debt. They're very lucky. They've got about $25,000 in cash at my favorite bank, Citibank, for those of you who've heard they have $200,000 in a Morgan Stanley account that's tax-exempt bonds and some money markets. They have a $550,000 at an IRA 401k at Scottrade. It's in mutual fund stocks and bonds because obviously it's tax exempt. Bill has a pension fund. He'll be fully vested in 2 years. Obviously they're eligible for Social Security, and then they get very good health care through Bill's work at a major accounting firm. So would you say that Bill and Alice are in good shape? Maybe yes and maybe no, because Bill is having heart palpitations and is having trouble sleeping. Well, why is that? What's he worried about? His accounting firm is now under investigation as part of the Fannie Mae investigation, criminal investigation of Fannie Mae. They're the auditor. You know what happened to Arthur Anderson. I mean, those partners were wiped out. So Bill is getting more and more concerned, and he's getting more and more concerned about their retirement. Because in addition, the health, he doesn't believe who here believes Social Security will be available when we need it? So Bill's very worried about Social Security. he's very worried about health care. And finally, he's got 3 kids, and he's spent a lot of time helping provide and get them through school. But now 2 of them are not making enough to get by. And so whether it's Dave or Liz, he's having to supplement their incomes. It turns out that Bill works within his accounting practice in a group that focuses on government contracting. And over the years, that's grown much and much more to defense contracting and military and enforcement contracting. And as a result, through his work, that's what he learns about. And so because of his concern about his retirement needs and providing for his family, also I should mention that that he has a sister who's been having health care problems, and so he's been helping to supplement her income and help her 2 kids through school. He's gotten more and more concerned, and so he's used his access to the knowledge in his practice to invest more and more of their retirement portfolio in defense contractors. And needless to say, he's been doing very, very well, and he's very pleased with himself. Now, how does Dave, his environmentalist son, and Liz, his prison ministry minister daughter, feel about his success in the market with his defense contractors? Not so wonderful. So there's tension grown up in this very successful and loving family between Dave and Liz, who understand the environmental crisis in front of us and the spiritual crisis upon us, and are concerned that Bill and Alice's investments are bringing negative karma to the family. So they're very concerned about that. And meantime, Bill and Alice are becoming more and more concerned by Dave and Liz's inability to generate income to support them. So what are they doing? They're working harder and harder to create financial wealth. And as a result, Dave and Liz are working harder and harder to create spiritual and community wealth and health. Okay? So we have a little bit of a double bind going on between the importance of providing for financial security of the family unit and making sure that the family unit is a blessing to its ecosystem, so to speak. Okay? Now, what is the family's big risks? So here's our family, which could be any of us. It's you and your community, your family. And what would you like? If you're like me, you want a beautiful world. And we have wealth. We have our living equity, which is the land, the plants, the trees, our health, people. And then we have financial equity. Is there anybody who feels that financial equity is not important? Because if you say it is, then we're going to take all your IRAs and 401ks away. So we have both, and both are important. Over the last 50 years, the last 100 years, we have centralized the financial system, not just in America, but worldwide, tremendously. And I tend to divide the world up between the pro-centralization team and the pro-decentralization team. I'm a member of the pro-decentralization team. But we've centralized the financial system, and most of us are participating through a highly centralized financial system. So we're purchasing, we're depositing, we're paying taxes, we're investing, and in all these different transactions, we're voting with our money. I always say we vote at the polls once a year, but we vote in the marketplace every day with all of our transactions and what and who we give our attention to. So we're literally voting with our time and our money all day long. Okay, so we're voting for the system, and then we're earning money and prestige of various kinds. And that system, more often than not, has become like a tapeworm. So that we crave the money, or we crave the prestige, and what we don't understand is that we're feeding the very cancer that is harming our communities and harming increasingly us. Okay, and part of that is because one of the things the tapeworm operates with is dirty tricks. Okay, and those dirty tricks have gotten increasingly dirtier and dirtier, and since I worked for George H.W. Bush, I'm sure you understand what I mean. And so we've become codependent. I want to tell a story I know many of you have heard. Who here has heard the red button story? Okay, well, I'm going to tell the red button story again. In the summer of 2000, I was speaking to a wonderful group of people called the Spiritual Frontiers Foundation, International Foundation, about the fact that the United States financial system launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year, according to the Department of Justice. And we were talking about the story of the CIA helping to facilitate crack cocaine into South Central LA, something that was affirmed by the CIA Inspector General report in 1998. And we were talking specifically about the legal construct that was created to do that behind the protection of national security law. So I said to the audience of about 100 people who are very wonderful, committed people to spiritual evolution, what would happen if we stopped being the worldwide leader in dirty money? And so we had a little interactive conversation, and they said, well, you know, the stock market would go down. So our 401ks and our IRAs would drop in value. And we might have to pay more taxes because the government would have trouble financing and rolling over its deficit, because all of our government checks are financed, you know, with $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of dirty money. And, you know, we might even have trouble rolling over the debt, and so our government checks might, you know, they might cancel programs. So I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your neighborhood, your town, your county, your state, and your country tomorrow, by whatever dint of your imagination. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button? 1. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our mutual funds to go down, and we don't want our government checks to stop, and we don't want the government checks of our neighbors and our family to stop, and we don't want our taxes to go up. And I said, so what you're saying is you want the Department of Justice and the CIA to facilitate hard narcotics to your children and grandchildren to keep your mutual funds up? And they said, yes, that's right. And that's why I say that we are codependent with the tapeworm, Because if you are the president in the United States, you're sitting between two parties. One is the people lending you money. Okay, if you don't borrow that money every week, you can't pay the checks. So you're borrowing money, and where are those folks getting? Who's the most powerful person who's lending you money? It's the person who controls $500 billion to $1 trillion a year, right? So you're borrowing dirty money, you need dirty money, you're addicted to dirty money, you're dependent on dirty money. And what happens if you don't get that money? Well, the 99 people, spiritually evolved people who want their check, will fire you. Okay, so you're in a double bind. Now, that's true for the president. It's also true for Bill and Alice and their 3 kids. Okay? Because everybody needs and wants the money, but at the same time, what they know is, you know, if we get the money by destroying the environment or destroying our spiritual anointing, all the money in the world doesn't matter. You can't eat money when there's no oxygen left. So the president's in a double bind, our families in a double bind, and the question is, how do we turn the red button green? How do we make money by pushing the red button? And that's what the Solari Model is about. But before you can do that, you've got to see the tapeworm, and we've got to see our own complicity in the tapeworm. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I travel all around the country, and someone will hear me talk, and then they'll say, you know, you're right. It's terrible. Those Clintons, they are so corrupt. Thank God for the Bushes. And then you drive to another place, and they say, I know, it's terrible. It's so corrupt. Those horrible Bushes, thank God for the Clintons. And so we want to keep taking this evil and moving it out. It's something that happens in Washington. It doesn't happen in my family. It doesn't happen in my block. It doesn't happen in me. I'm not doing it. It's someplace out there far, far away. It's interesting. Wherever I talk, I used to talk a lot about narcotics trafficking. Narcotics trafficking was something that the CIA and Langley did. It's not something that went on in 73,000 neighborhoods, which is obviously where it has to happen. What are some of the drains? Does anybody here feel drained? Okay, the tapeworm has got us. What are some of the drains? Bill's worried about retirement security, but what else is he worried about? Well, in the last 10 years, while we've been borrowing more and more money, mortgage money, consumer debt, government debt at the federal, state, and local level, so we've been borrowing more and more money. While we've been borrowing more and more money, what have we been doing? We've been moving all the jobs abroad. So what happens when you increase the debt dramatically and then you move all the income abroad? Right. Now, there's something else. I'm not going to go into it tonight, but I was one of a group of leaders who had audited financial statements requirements instituted for the federal government. We've never gotten audited financials produced, but what we now know, thanks to the refusal to produce them, is that there's over $4 trillion missing from the federal government. Well, when the federal government borrows a couple $1 trillion, and then that money gets stolen, and then we, the taxpayers, have to pay it back, you have a productivity gap, okay? So what's Bill worried about? He's worried about not just all the jobs moving abroad, but obviously immigrants coming in to be doing accounting, doing software development, doing all these things. So there's a real drop in income. He's also worried about taxes going up when that money is going down a black hole. I mean, it's very depressing, as you know, to work a third or a half of a year to pay your taxes and then see that money just go down a drain, or not even go down a drain, but used to fund activities which rape your community and harm you. What's Alice worried about? Alice is worried about the fact that our water is deteriorating. I mean, I'm amazed. I counted up the other day how much I pay every year for water, not just buying bottled water or gallons of water, this kind of water, or this thing to filter my water, but how much I pay in federal municipal taxes for clean water. You know, it's a double hit. So Alice is worried about deteriorating air, water, food, and frankly, you know, events are depressing. I mean, just simply turning on and watching the news is depressing. What are Joey and Dave worried about? Well, Joey's a tax accountant too. So he's worried about a lot of what Bill's worried about, but he's in the market every day and he's watching the dollar falling. He's seen how much our wealth is deteriorating just as that dollar falls. But also, he's just had a baby, so he's really worried about the popsicle index. Does anybody here know what I mean by the popsicle index? Okay. The popsicle index is my indicator for the well-being of a neighborhood. It's the percent of people who believe a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle, and come home alone safely. So let me say that again. It's the percent of people in a neighborhood who believe a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle, and come home alone safely. So when I was a little girl growing up in West Philadelphia, the popsicle index was 100%. It was unthinkable that a child wasn't safe to just run up to the corner, buy a popsicle, play some pinballs, and come home alone any time. Today, in my old neighborhood in Philadelphia, the popsicle index is maybe 10%. If I ask a kid, they'll say 0 because they're not free to run around and play. But it's very low. When I was a little girl, the Dow Jones index, we all know what the Dow Jones index is, right? Was 500. So the popsicle index was 100%, and the Dow Jones was 500. So the Dow Jones is now above 10,000, and where's the popsicle index? Okay, so we have a win-lose relationship between living equity and financial equity. We've driven our financial equity up in a way that drives our living equity down. And the key to pushing the red button in a way that turns it green is to get that into a win-win relationship. Because a lot of times I'll hear living equity people propose, well, what we need to do is stop those bad finance guys. You know, we'll push them out, we'll do this, we'll do that. And what a financial person hears them saying is, it's still a win-lose relationship, but living equity needs to win and financial equity needs to lose. And that's not the solution. The solution, in fact, is to create a win-win relationship where they drive each other up together so that we optimize all wealth. Now, Dave and Liz intuitively understand that. Dave understands the environmental crisis. Dave understands peak oil. It's funny, in the last 6 weeks, I have had more people has anybody here read Crossing the Rubicon by Mike Rupert? Okay. I've had about 20 of these calls from family, friends, or potential clients saying, oh my God, I just run Crossing the Rubicon and I need to reinvent my entire life plan and I have $3 million and I want to shift it all tomorrow. And you're like, well, the first thing you need to do is calm down. But when I say to them, you know, have you ever thought of investing in renewable resources in your neighborhood? I just came from Maui, and a friend of mine is making an investment. One of the local guys who does solar energy is making so much money on his inventory. The solar panels are going up in value so fast that he's decided to take all of his money out of the stock market and put it all in solar panels. So for the first time, I'm hearing very significant people saying, oh, right, being energy self-sufficient is not a function of price. Because the question is, who do you trust with your life? Do I trust my local utility? Do I trust BP? Do I trust Amoco? Do I trust Halliburton with my life? Okay, and so suddenly now things are not a function. You know, where you bank is not a function of who has the lowest ATM fee. It's who do you trust with your life. Okay. Liz is working in the prison ministries. You know, I won't go into my whole speech on prison, something I'm very interested in. But one of America's biggest businesses is incarcerating ourselves. And if you spend any time with the people being incarcerated, they're certainly not the most criminal people among us. And if you work in and around prison ministries, you come to learn an awful lot about how the world really works. And so Liz is privy to seeing, you know, sort of the covert world through her activities, and she is clearly very concerned about what it's going to mean to her mother, her father, that so much of their lives is being subsidized without their knowledge by doing harm to other people. Okay? And that is something that's obviously very frightening. Okay? But what's happening? No one in this family sees the tapeworm clearly. They see a piece of it. Okay? It's like, it's like an invisible hippo, and one guy feels each foot and one guy feels the head, but nobody's standing back and saying, wait a minute, there's a hippo. And because they don't see the tapeworm clearly, they don't see that they're each other's solutions. Bill and Joey know how to make a business sustainable. Okay, Dave keeps telling them they should donate money to do renewable energy. And what Dave doesn't see is they can't donate money if their job is to make sure the family is financially secure. Okay? But the opportunity is if you can bring the spiritual technology, the environmental know-how, and the financial and legal. I can't do anything without an accountant. Where's your accountant, Brian? And so they all have the solution if they can just keep communicating and realizing that there's a tapeworm, and the opportunity is to build a way out of the tapeworm. Okay. So, investment strategy. What are our key risk issues? I'm a great believer in scenario planning. Does anybody know? Who here's ever done scenario planning? Okay, scenario planning says, I don't know what the future is. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I can do is I can anticipate within reason all the different things that might happen, and I can have a plan. So that whatever happens, I've thought through what I'm going to need and how I'm going to react. And what I find with scenario planning that's very powerful is when I come up with my scenarios, and I'm going to show you some of the scenarios I use for investment strategy. When I come up with scenarios, I always focus on the worst case. I'm a very positive, optimistic kind of person, but if I can have a plan for the worst case, then I don't need to worry about the worst case. And one of the things I've found is I'm a person who in the last 53 years has lived in I've lived with very high risks at a certain point in my career, and I don't have a problem doing it because I have a plan for the worst case. I'll never forget, I was flying out to Detroit one winter, and the plane hit a hiccup and it went into a nosedive, and I just figured they were going to pull out of the nosedive until the stewardess, who was standing in the aisle, now leaning forward, burst into tears and said, "Oh my God, we're going to die." And I didn't know it was her first flight. It was her first flight as a stewardess, but I didn't know that. So immediately the first thing came out of my head was, I need a plan. So I'm a great believer in plans. But the key to figuring out scenarios is to look, particularly the worst case, is to look at the risk issues. So what are the risk issues? Falling U.S. dollar. Okay, falling U.S. dollar. The impact of a falling U.S. dollar has not hit hard yet because the Chinese and other currencies are either pegging or trying to hold their relationship to us, particularly before Christmas, because they want the sales. The dollar goes down, then they don't make the sales. But at some point, if fundamental economics apply, the dollar is going to keep going down, and that's when you're going to see our purchasing power cut by 50% or more if we just go with fundamental economics. Essentially, I have an article that I would recommend to you. I spent, in 1998, I put my investment banking career on hold and decided to map out the covert world. That period ended this summer with the publication of an article that I did with a money manager in London. The article is called "The Negative Return on Investment Economy, a Discourse on American Black Budget." What I was trying to figure out in those 5 years is not how does the Matrix... Has everybody seen the movie The Matrix? You know what I mean by The Matrix? Not how does the Matrix work, but how do they finance the Matrix? Because if you can understand how the Matrix is financed, you can understand how the Matrix is vulnerable. And what I describe in that article is how the system developed by which the American corporate insider has the lowest cost of capital on a planet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight, but when you can combine U.S. Treasury securities with fiat currency, with organized crime profits, and leverage that in the stock market, then you can, in essence, finance for free. I mean, you can make money financing. So we have the lowest cost of capital, and the problem with that is the people who have the lowest, and the organizations who have the lowest cost of capital are not the most productive. And so increasingly you're seeing the tapeworm, the unproductive, take over the productive through this powerhouse of combining financial markets with federal credit, with fiat currency, with organized crime. And if you're interested in how the mechanics of that work, I would encourage you to read that article, which is in the workshop resource links. What does that mean, manipulated markets? Byron mentioned I'm a member of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. It's a group of people involved in illuminating, and there's been litigation about the manipulation of the gold markets and the silver markets by the federal government. So financial markets, all markets have been manipulated. What happens is, as you manipulate your financial system, whether it's big government contracts to the inside players, companies, whether it's how you rig the regulation, whether it's using money to manipulate in the financial markets and subsidize certain stocks, all those things make bigger and bigger percentages of the economy dependent on that mechanism. Okay? And so financially behind the scenes, more and more and more becomes centralized. And as we know, centralized systems are very fragile. Okay? And so what happens, I have an article, another article, which is linked, called The Myth of the Rule of Law. And what it describes is how more and more of this money comes into a community and encourages people to be more and more unproductive. I did an analysis that's described in The Myth of Rule of Law for a group of investors in 1998. We did an estimation of all the federal money that came into the Philadelphia area, and what we realized was every year all the people participating in the economy got stupider and stupider and stupider because they were being paid to do something that was economically not productive. For example, when you have 2 million people sitting around in prison, it's not very useful. When you have another couple million watching them, it's not very useful. Another risk here is the extent to which dirty tricks have been successful in thwarting alternatives from developing. I've spent the last 12 years working on building community alternatives. And I've become an expert in all the dirty tricks that get used, and I won't go into it tonight. But if we're going to turn this around, if we're going to see the tapeworm, then we need to see all of the different dirty tricks that the tapeworm can use, and there are very many. Finally, peak oil. Enough people read Rupert's book that I know we know what peak oil is. Environmental crisis. I'm not an environmentalist, but it's the state of the environment is very, very serious. And finally, community deterioration. So let's look at our scenarios. Dirty money bubble. I use 4 scenarios. Dirty money bubble assumes that we keep not wanting to push the red button, and we don't. The tapeworm wins and continues. Now, Social Security privatization. Does anybody know what Social Security privatization is? That means instead of overtly borrowing money from the Treasury and using it to buy the stocks of the inside players, so that the Bush family friends can finance at a much lower cost than you and I, using our money. That means we can do it overtly. Okay? Social Security fund is empty, essentially. So what they're going to do is go out, borrow money worldwide, using the military to encourage people to buy more Treasury securities, and then take that money and buy Halliburton stock so that Halliburton can have more capital at a cheaper cost and come into our community and buy up all of our companies for cheap. Okay? Let me give you another example of how the tapeworm wins at the cost of capital game. Let's say I have 100 little businesses in my neighborhood, and they have $100 million of revenues, $1 million each, and their total profit is $10 million. So we have $10 million of net income. What's that worth as an equity investor? Well, traditionally, a small business doesn't have liquid capital is worth about 1 to 5 times its profit. So let's say our 100 little businesses are worth $10 million to $50 million. Well, Walmart stock trades at 20 or more times earnings, right? Because if you have an IRA, your broker will tell you you can't buy you can't invest in the Hickory Valley meat market. You have to buy Walmart, right? Okay. So why is that? Because it's liquid. It's a liquid stock. It's a lot of management. If the guy who runs the Hickory Valley Meat Market, is in a car accident, God forbid, the value of the company could be why. So, they have resources. Okay, so if Walmart gets this market share, how much is it worth? Well, what's 20 times 10? It's $200 million. So Walmart can come in, galumph, get this market share, and instead of it being worth 10 to 50, it's worth 200 million. That's 150 million capital gains. I'm an investment banker. I'm very excited about that. So capital gains, that's 150 million of capital gains. Now, what the Solari model is about is we don't need Walmart to securitize equity. We can do that without Walmart, right? Okay, so a group of small businessmen and their local customers could securitize their own equity. I mean, who needs Walmart, right? Okay. The problem, let's look at the problem. How can I, as Walmart, make more than $150 million on eating up that market share? Well, let's say I'm teamed up with the Black Budget Boys and they're financing me. And they bring drugs into a neighborhood, right? They sell $20 million worth of drugs over a couple years, right? They take that profit, right? And they use it to finance Walmart coming in. So Walmart doesn't have to put any equity down. I call it a neighborhood leverage buyout. I can buy up their market with their money in a way that lowers the price to me because they're all so busy trying to, bail their kids out of prison, out of jail. It's easy to move in on them, right? Okay. I have an article, again, linked, I think, in the workshop resources, Narco Dollars for Beginners. Kind of describes this process. So the dirty money bubble, and the question if you're Bill and Alice is, are you going to stay in the dirty money bubble? Are you going to stay in the Titanic, or are you going to get thrown off? Okay, because not everybody, there's not enough money in the bubble for everybody, right? And that's what's happening in the middle class. We're all getting thrown off. Slow bleed. Slow bleed is we've been spending way beyond our means, whether it's the government, consumers. Again, you finance $4 trillion, then you steal it. And so what happens is, to keep the game going, the tapeworm just progressively takes more and more. I mean, what's Patriot Act 1 and 2? It's just tougher, meaner, eating into our capital. When I work with clients who want to reposition their 401ks or their IRAs, what I've discovered is, because I've only been doing this now since the summer when we finished sort of building the map, the rules that have been created to keep, let me give you an example. I just had a client who's got money in a Swiss bank account, was just offered a 1-year investment in a AAA high-quality bank CD in Swiss francs plus a yield of 5%. So in a moment of a falling dollar, they can get the appreciation on the Swiss franc plus 5% plus a very high-quality security. Now, I've been struggling with my 401k and IRA clients to find them something that gets them 3%, let alone, and that's in the dollar. So what has been happening is the rules and regulations are making it harder and harder and harder for Americans to get the benefit of free markets. It's a two-tier system. Chickens come home to roost. There's a very well-known economist at Morgan Stanley, Steve Roach. An article was published about 2 weeks ago that said he'd gone off with a group of private money managers and said, he was really worried about an Armageddon scenario, something worse than the Great Depression. He then published not quite a retraction, but something where he moved a little bit out of Armageddon and said, well, there's a chance of Armageddon, but we'll probably have slow bleed. Chickens come home to roost is the Armageddon scenario. If you said to me, what would the value be of the dollar if we marked it to market economically in a world where we gave away our nuclear arsenal? We destroyed the nuclear arsenal, and so our dollar wasn't backed up by force, it was simply backed up by our productivity. My guess is the dollar would drop 80 to 90%. Okay, that's where we are in terms of fundamental economics. that has huge ramifications globally, because the thing that has been keeping the Asian and European economies going is the U.S. consumer buying. Okay? And so a consumer economy has driven the world markets, but what do we need if we're going to solve peak oil, or if we're going to solve the environmental crisis? We need to lower consumption. Okay, and part of the Solari model is asking the question, how do you generate huge and hideous capital gains in the stock market, which I would say is a noble thing, by reducing consumption? And in fact, there's a way to do it. So the fourth is, and let me mention chicken come home to roost. As the economy, and this is true for slow bleed as well, the value of real things, of concrete things, and the knowledge about how to deal with them increases. I live in Hickory Valley, Tennessee, and one of the reasons I live in Hickory Valley, Tennessee is because everyone in Hickory Valley, including now me, knows how to do concrete things. We're plumbers, we're truckers, we're small farmers, we're whatever. But that knowledge of how to do things in the concrete world is going to become more and more and more valuable. Okay, the final, all three of the first three scenarios, all three are centralization. They're scenarios where economic and political power continues to centralize. The Solari economy is where we decentralize. Now let me just quick talk about investment strategies. I'm going to go real quickly. What I tell my clients is pick the scenario that you most want to plan for. And again, I really try and get people to have a plan for the worst case. Then what I say is eliminate as much debt as possible, with one exception, and it depends on a person's circumstance. I'm not a great believer in having a tremendous amount of value, equity, and real estate under this legal jurisdiction. Now, part of it is my experiences with the judicial and enforcement infrastructure of this country have been so hideous. But for someone in the right circumstance, taking money, equity out of your home and moving it into other assets, more liquid assets or offshore, may make sense. The second thing I say is protect yourself against interest rate risk. If you have long fixed income securities, you want to get them short. If you have high yield securities, you want to get them not low credit, high credit. But most important, most Americans have most of their assets and earning power in the dollar. And you want to start paying attention for where the dollar is in value and how much you can improve your retirement savings and your financial position by diversifying. Now, the diversification that I prefer, I'm fully invested in litigation, as some of you know. Got about a $6 million equity investment in litigation with the Department of Justice. But if I was still a very wealthy person, which I do intend to be again, I would have a significant investment in precious metals. I'm a great believer in precious metals in this kind of environment. And precious metal means gold and it means silver. There are many, many different ways of investing in precious metals. I'm not going to talk about, I'll run through them very quickly. You can buy physical. And I really encourage you, if you're not buying stocks or mutual funds or digital gold, you must take possession physically. Okay, because in many gold and silver programs, there's no real gold there. You know, I've had bankers tell me, or clients, yes, you know, we have 1,000 clients who think they have 1,000 ounces in a pool, but we only really have 200 ounces. It's a shell game. So you can buy physical, whether bullions or coins. You can buy digital gold, and eventually we're going to get to digital silver. Take a look at a website, goldmoney.com. If you want to move money offshore in a second, or in a week, you can do it quickly through goldmoney.com. And you can transact in gold through digital systems. There are mutual funds and investment funds where you can invest both in mining companies and in bullion, just buying a stock in a pool of gold and precious metals sitting in the vault. So that is one place where in all the scenarios I described, that is one asset class that will do well. Another asset class that will do very well is reducing your dependency on centralized systems. Okay, and it's very particular to each family, each place. But whether it's water, energy, food, anything you can do to reduce your dependency on centralized systems is marvelous. And last but not least, my favorite is reduce your expenses. And I have to thank the Department of Justice because my expenses are now much lower than they used to be. Before we start on Solari, one of the things I found in my collaboration with Christina Engelbert, where are you, Christina? Is in our society, there's tremendous built-up tension between people who understand living capital and people who understand financial capital. And we don't have the personal bridges and the common language. And it's funny, Christina's been working with it now for 2 years, and we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And what I've discovered is that we often think of living capital people tend to think of financial capital people as bad people, or financial capital people tend to think of living people as bad people. You know, we get into these traps of not really listening to each other. And it's because we have different languages. But the opportunity, the tapeworm is a master at playing us in this game. And it's what Caroline Casey and I tried to do with the Magic and Money. How do we get, and it was so funny because her audience would come in and they were all beautifully dressed and they were creative and fascinating. And then my audience would come in and they were like the accountants and the lawyers. And I'd go off and have lunch and somebody would say, you know, you're really hurting your reputation to associate with these people, you know. And she would hear the same thing. It was very interesting. And what we didn't understand was that until the Magic and Money people gave each other energy, the tapeworm was going to be in control. Okay, let's talk about Solari. I introduced the Popsicle Index. The Popsicle Index came out of found myself as Assistant Secretary of Housing as responsible for at the time, $320 billion portfolio of mortgage insurance. And we were thought by the actuaries at the time to be financially bankrupt. And so I said, I'm going to figure out how to make sure we turn this around. We need to really improve our financial situation. And I found that the single biggest driver of our losses, the single biggest variable, was the Popsicle Index. Okay, and so if somehow the Popsicle Index went up in every community, then the financial losses that the federal government was sustaining would decrease. Because think about it, the healthy communities. We had one town in New Mexico where 70% of the mortgages in that town were in default and owned by FHA, Freddie, or Fannie. Okay. The second indicator we use is the Solari ratio. If you take all of your savings, your financial savings, and divide it by your annual expenses, so let's say your annual expenses are $50,000 and you have $250,000 of savings, then your Solari ratio is 5. That's your buffer zone. And one of the challenges we have is we're all trying to increase our buffer zone by doing things that directly or indirectly make our risk go up. Okay, so if I invest money and make money in Halliburton, you know, my savings may go up and I may increase my financial buffer zone, but I've just made the world a more hostile, dangerous place, and so I need more and more financial capital. And where you ultimately come to is that you can't solve these problems with money. At some point, you need people and you need community. Solari investors, well, let me start another way. Okay, let's go to a community. Let's say that I start a little Solari venture fund to finance all the small businesses in my community. So instead of trading at 5 times, let's say we securitize them. We do a community offering. Everybody here buys stock in the Marin County, the Mill Valley Venture Fund. Okay, so we're all shareholders. Now, if I go to Walmart and I spend $10,000 a year at Walmart, and Walmart makes $1,000 in profit, how much does their stock go up from my business? $20,000. How much of that $20,000 do I get? So one of my partners used to say, bupkis, right? Okay, now let's say we do a community offering. We all pool our money and we invest in this pool of 100 businesses. We get their stock to go up in value now because it's securitized. So let's say it goes up to 10 after 5 years. Okay, so that's a capital gains of, how much is that? 5 times, it's $50 million in capital gains that the small business people and we have earned. Now let's say we spend our $10,000 a year with those small businesses that we're the shareholder of. What happens? Their stock goes up from our purchases and we get a piece of it, right? Because we're shareholders. Okay, now watch this. So now we're making money. This is fun, right? I'm making up for what the Sheriff of Nottingham cost me. Let's say the stock is trading at $10, okay? So the stock is trading at $10, not just in Mill Valley, but in 73,000 communities around the country. Stock's trading at $10, financing our small business. So we're lowering the cost of capital in a way that makes us money to the guys who the tapeworm won't finance. We're saying, no, Mr. Tapeworm, we're not going to buy at your store. We're not going to let you, get our retirement savings in your thing, because we didn't make any money on Enron, so why should we do that? We're going to bank ourselves. We're going to get the capital gains ourselves, right? So we're going to do this. Stock's trading at $10 in all these communities across America. Let's say we heal the environment and reduce consumption. What happens to the value of the stock? It goes up. So global investors can make money healing the environment. And global investors can make money making places more beautiful. And global investors, what happens to the popsicle index? Global investors, let's say that global investors had invested in Iraq in the Solari Model. How would the global investors feel if the Bushes and Halliburton and everybody went galumphing in and destroyed Iraq? They'd be pretty angry, right? Because they lose money. Okay? So instead of making money by harvesting communities, you can make money by healing communities. You can generate financial capital gains from financing communities with equity. Well, anyway, in the 90s, I thought this was a terrific idea. So we started to do these deals, Solari Venture Funds for communities. We'd written our first check. We were negotiating 9 more deals and raising capital to do 100. And that's when the Department of Justice dropped on our head. And I discovered that I discovered a little bit about how the tapeworm enforces small businesses not having access to the stock market. So I started to do this process, and I came up with the idea, well, instead of asking small business to take the first step, because I discovered, interestingly enough, that the courage in this country is in the activist community. And the courage in this country, if you come to Hickory Valley, it's the moms. It's the young people. It's not the people who manage the money. And what I discovered is if you look at all the people who have the courage and are willing to do this, they were generally not in business and they were generally not financially literate. And so in January, we're going to launch our first product specifically for this market. It's called Solari Investor Circles, and it's investment clubs that help you get together. I always tell people, don't worry about if there's a conspiracy. If you're not in one, you need to start one. Okay? So they can have their conspiracies, but we can too. And so think of this more as not just starting an investment club. You're starting, a cell in the French resistance. So you really need people you trust. But a Solari Investor Circle starts to help you get back to withdrawing your money and your time and attention out of the tapeworm and into back to basic fundamental economics that help you, not just because they perform economically, but because indirectly they don't finance somebody who's killing you. I can't tell you how many audiences I go to and I find out, I'm in an audience of 1,000 peace activists and I ask them who banks at Citibank, JP Morgan, and 3 other really big banks, and half the room raises their hands. Okay, which means $14,000 per person is missing from the federal government, and yet the banks who facilitated that missing money, because it had to leave on their train tracks, right? Had to go on the train tracks. The banks who did that, we all keep depositing our money with them. It's like you can steal from us and it's okay as long as we get a kickback on our ATM fee. So we're starting Solari Investor Circles to help the non-financially sophisticated person start to pool their money and learn about this. Because one of the things I've learned about, you can't do this by yourself. You need, whether it's an investment pool or a savings pool, you need to be together to do this. Let me give you an example of one of the first model transactions. In every neighborhood in America, there's one person who's making 2% on a bank CD at their local bank. They can't afford to take any risk. There's another person who's a respectable person who's paying 18 to 26% on their credit card. Okay? That's on Wall Street. We call that a huge arbitrage opportunity. You've got a third person who's making 5% in the stock market. They're irritated because they kind of feel like, well, I'm in a bubble economy. I don't feel good about this, but they can afford to take risk. And if you look at the cash flows of those three people, there's a tremendous opportunity to help this person amortize and get out of debt in a way that this person makes more money, this person makes more money, and Citibank loses. Okay? There's no law that says you can't. So there are tremendous opportunities to re-engineer the tapeworm out as long as we hold ourselves to a discipline of making it financially attractive to all of us and making sure whether it's money or risk, we're taking care of that. Now, it's really funny because up here in the front row are my good friends, Dave and Karina Dixon. You can see, let me see if I can find your picture on the website. Let me see if I can. Anyway, so I went to Sebastopol. Christina has her ex-husband has a trailer on her property, so I got trailer trained in Sebastopol, and I went there to write the starter kits for the Solari Investor Circle. And so I get this great email from this guy named Dave Dixon in Guerneville, California. And he says, would you have lunch with us? So I just had a feeling, it sounded like a really cool person. Wait a minute, let me see if I can get it. So I get to lunch, and I start talking about doing Solari Investor Circles or starting a Solari. And Dave is looking at me like he's going to fall asleep. And he said, that's me there's Dave and Karina and their two friends. That's us having, we didn't have too much wine. I had too much cheese, but we didn't have too much wine. He says, well, wait a minute. This is, a Solari Investor Circle. I got to get together with a whole bunch of people. It's work. It's complicated. What can I do by myself? What can I do to get ready to do a circle? But what can we do in my family first before we start to organize and start our conspiracy? And so instead of writing the starter kits, thanks to Dave and Karina, we wrote something called Coming Clean, which is an article, and you can find it on the website, and I encourage you to read it. And it's literally, what are all the different things that we can do to start to exercise the tapeworm from our lives, but in a way that gives us energy. What I always tell people is, the problem is that I'm being drained, you're being drained. And so the question is, how do we reverse that? So what can I do that gives me more energy, whether it saves me time, makes me money, and that gives me the time and money I need to do the next thing, which saves me more time and money. So it's a process of reversal. And one of the things we put in here was something called Quick Start. One of the things I do, I tell everyone, since 1984, I was privy when I was on Wall Street to information about some of the uses being planned for TV, including subliminal programming, and it scared me to death. And in 1984, I stopped watching TV. In 1986, I gave away my TV. And essentially, I haven't had a TV since. And one of the things I find as I go from community to community is if you simply add up all the time that people are spending watching TV, which is really draining and depressing them, if they can get themselves unhooked from TV, that's a tremendous amount of time that can be invested in something that gives them much more energy in the short run. So turning off the TV, I have enough trouble keeping the tapeworm out of my house without inviting the tapeworm in. Anyway, so Coming Clean, so Coming Clean is sort of our package for what you can do individually. But the power of the opportunity comes when we start to see how we're the outside players and our retirement savings have been giving the inside players an advantage up against us. and we start to re-engineer that, whether it's in informal clubs or eventually through venture funds in our neighborhood, where we start to circulate our money to ourselves. But this is what's important. Let me go back to Bill and Alice. Bill and Alice need to invest in the renewable resource project that Dave can figure out in a way that respects and honors the preciousness of their family retirement savings. And that is a standard and discipline that the pro-decentralization team has not created or maintained. It's, I can't stress to you enough, wherever I go, I find that, because let's divide we have the pro-centralization team and we have the pro-decentralization team. Right now, the wealthy on the pro-decentralization team are being drained, okay? And the wealth in this audience is a precious asset behind freedom. And so we need to find a way not just to stop banking the pro-centralization team, but in working with each other so that we are worthy of the sustainable investment of the pro-decentralization wealth, and our wealth starts to go up. My dream is Halliburton wealth goes down and the decentralization team wealth goes up. And it does it in a way, because right now in a negative return on investment economy, we're destroying wealth. I always tell people the problem is not that some people have too much money or that we're really ultimately centralizing the wealth. The problem is that from the point of view of the birds and the trees and the dolphins, the planet is worse off for humans. So if we can get the humans in alignment, the amount of wealth that can be created is so phenomenal. I mean, I would rather be free to create the amount of wealth that can be created than bicker about where the 4 trillion is and how to get it back. I bicker about that because I want to negotiate the right to have a locally controlled solution. Okay? So coming clean is what you can do by yourself. Solari Investor Circles is where you can start a conspiracy with people you trust. That's the important thing. People you trust. Because making money is about trust, both integrity and competence and effectiveness, so people you trust. And then finally, if you can start to pool and engineer enough money in your place, then in the small business community are small businesses who can succeed and survive if they have your investment and your purchases. And again, at the workshop, resources on Solari Action Network, many, many articles on the specifics. We'll have the starter kits up at the website in January. In the meantime, we have at the Solari Investor Circle Forum something called the Invention Room. We have a group of people who've agreed to help us because the starter kits, this is when you start to look into local investment, there's so much opportunity that it's an unending journey. And so we anticipate, I said the mistake I made in 1998 is we tried to invent it ourselves. And I said, this time it's going to be like the fire that jumps and leaps through the grass. The network's going to invent it. Okay? Because it's real simple. The guy who has the lowest cost of capital wins. That's how it works in the matrix. And if our investment and our purchases and our deposits are going to make our enemy stronger, we're not going to make it. But if we turn that around and we start to think of not just our vote every year at the polls as a vote, but our vote in the marketplace every day as a vote, we have the power to shift that around.
You also mentioned investing in gold, silver, and precious metals, but I was under the impression that those things are played with by the powers that be as far as how rare they are in a certain moment, and if that's something that is really trustworthy.
Gold has the strong dollar policy, which has been in effect from the Clinton administration from about 1995-96 to date. The strong dollar policy was basically a policy of suppressing the price of gold while you bubbled the mortgage market and you bubbled government debt. And you basically pushed treasury securities in dollars worldwide in a way that was very, very coercive to most economies. Now, let's look at the gold price being suppressed. When you suppress the gold price, in most areas of this country, you turn off people's smoke alarm. Okay? People think the economy is fine because they know if there was a problem, the price of gold would go up. Now, as the price of gold has been suppressed, what has happened? The inventories of gold and silver owned by governments, sovereign governments, and central banks around the world have been moved out into private hands. Okay? So imagine a whole treasure chest of gold, and it's sitting in the central banks and governments, and instead of moving to private hands at market value, it's moving into private hands at lower than market value. It's what people talk about privatization. I call it piratization. Okay? When you take something, an asset of government or an asset owned by the community, and you transfer it into private hands at below market value, that's not privatization, that's stealing. The piratization, I mean, I've written a lot about the piratization of real estate and mortgages at HUD. The manner in which the piratization of gold is occurring is by suppressing the price in the market. Now, what does that mean? There's several pressures, or there's several supports in the price of gold. One is, now that whoever owns it, you know, by the time they get it all out, what will they want? They'll want the price to go higher. There's something else, though, and that is all the fundamental economic pressure supporting a higher price has been building up and building up. And one of the problems they're having in the market is keeping the price down, because the physical demand now of people wanting to buy gold has become stronger and stronger. So in all scenarios, there's pressure for precious metals to go up because, and somebody said to me today, well, you know, the dollar isn't fiat currency, you know, and he described some of the, you know, the flexibility with which the dollar is used. And I said, well, let's call it bungee currency. It's just like a bungee. You know, as bungee currency becomes more and more untrusted, the question is what will be trusted? And of course, gold and precious metals has always had, you know, that fundamental value. So a gold coin, I can sit in front of an audience of children who know nothing about money and hold a, you know, a $20 gold coin and a $20 bill, and which do they want? They want the coin. Mm-hmm. So there's a fundamental value there which is very magical. And so I think in all scenarios, the value of the real goes up and the value of the bungee goes down.
Yeah. One last small question, if you care to touch on this at all, but I'm spreading out my like retirement account now where things go, and it's just hard to know what to, you know, with all this, to where to put your money. So would you advise at all in investing in foreign countries or foreign, you know, different economies as opposed to like mutual funds here?
Here's what I believe in investing in. I believe in investing in that which you know and trust. Mm-hmm. So I tend to invest in what I know about, and I very much believe in investing in excellent management. You know, I'm a people investor. So I invest, and a great venture capitalist will tell you the way you make money in venture capital is by investing in people. And in fact, when I realized how bad the tapeworm was in 1998, you know, because basically I came out of the Bush administration and I said, we've got a problem here. and so I invested, you know, my life, my money, my company in inventing and prototyping the Solari Model for two reasons. One is I don't want to make money doing things that kill my family. You know, or anybody for that matter, number one. But number two, I get a kick out of creating wealth. I don't get a kick out of harvesting and destroying wealth. And so I'm fully banked in the Solari Model and in the possibility of America reviving in a very wealth-creating way. But that's me investing in people, because to me, I don't think I can be safe. I don't think financial capital can make a human being safe. So I would really encourage you to invest in those areas that you want to learn about and that you want to know about and that you want to track, or to invest with people you really trust. For example, there are money managers who I really trust because I think they have integrity and I think they're quite good at what they do. You know, I feel very comfortable recommending to people that they put their money with this person, this person, this person, because they know those areas and they track them. So I would really encourage you to invest with those you trust.
Thank you.
On the workshop resource link, there's questions on investment strategy. Somebody in my family called me up and was having problems with getting their broker to really appreciate the risks of a falling dollar. So I wrote a series of questions that might be useful to you on investment strategy.
My name's David. I've got about 28 questions, but
Let me just, one thing. At the Solari Action Network, there's a forum called Communicate with Catherine. If your question doesn't get answered tonight and you have a question, I would really encourage you to post it there. I always answer the questions unless I get a lot of one question, and then I batch them and write an article in response. So,
I have a lot of questions, but I'll put it this way. I've worked in finance for 20 years, and I'm thrilled listening to you. And I'm having trouble following everything you're saying, and I'm wondering, is this? Do you know if your message is getting communicated effectively? Because what worries me is, most people don't understand present value,
right.
net present value. They don't know how to use a financial calculator. I've raised a lot of money,
Right.
and this is great.
Well,
But people are going to have there's a lot of education to do here.
let me try and answer the question this way. To a certain extent, I'm guilty of trying to keep the message quiet. Over the last 5 years, I and my colleagues have published 50 articles, linked through a website for free, describing everything I talked about, whether it's the tapeworm, the Solari model. It's all been written up in very detailed articles. A lot of the financial stuff has been written with and worked with a variety of different investors and money managers around the world, so I've educated. What happened to me in 1998 was I got a real education in the dirty tricks of the tapeworm and the dirty tricks of what someone can do to stop someone like me. And so the issue was not how do you teach the Solari model. The issue was how do you spread this knowledge virally in a way that avoids the dirty or overcomes the dirty tricks. Okay, and so to a certain extent, I've been a little bit mollified while I work out the model because I want to succeed in avoiding the dirty tricks. But do I think the message is getting out very quietly? It's getting out in the right networks. I think when, a couple thousand people on the living equity and financial equity side grok the opportunity and see how much money they're going to make. Because once you really get in, once a financial person gets in and sees the arbitrage, if something's trading at 1 times and with a little bit of work you can get it trading at 20 times, how much capital gains that is. So when you really get into understanding how much money can be made, capital gains in insurance, stock market, everything, greed will spread this. If we can get it to the point where it can beat the dirty tricks. And frankly, until the election, that was not there. It's there now, which is why we're launching in January.
Yes, I agree pretty much what you said about the financial thing, but you didn't emphasize enough the peak oil. Without oil, all bets are off, basically.
Right.
And the only thing I could imagine telling my friends, if I would be younger, go invest in an organic farm, far away from the cities where you have a little water.
Right. Right. And it's interesting, I've spent a lot of time in the last 5 years driving around and spending time with people who, move back to the woods and start organic farms and get Solari. And what you discover when you listen to all of that, we can't all do that. It's not a plan that we all run off into the woods. At some point, we're going to collectively have to address the issues. But I'll tell you, I agree with you about peak oil, and I haven't gone into it because it's a whole nother conversation. But what I would love is if you would run off and get that wonderful man who ran the mutual funds and persuade him that peak oil is what it is, and he has a reason to make sure his customers know that things are not as hunky-dory. If you could put the fear of God into him, I would really appreciate it.
I want to, there's a real good book on it. It's called The Party's Over by
Yes.
Richard Heinberg. And
Yes.
also, I think
Yes. And I would just say because Mike Rupert and I talk about this all the time, I'm a great believer that the real story is not peak oil, it's the suppression of alternative technology. Yeah. Because if you look, if you look at the technology, which I know or believe to be available over the last 200 years, there's no reason we need to be dependent on fossil fuel, but you can't change that unless you change the way money works. And the economics of reducing consumption of fossil fuel work wonderfully if you can make, oh, we're back. You can make money on re-engineering how the money works by place. Let me give you an example. I regularly saw in the federal government neighborhoods where we were spending $250,000 per unit to fund housing that you could do for $50,000 in that neighborhood. Okay, so I won't get into the long and short of it, but 50% of the money in this economy is governmental, and there's huge arbitrages unless you re-engineer those by place. You can't deal with all the other economic issues of peak oil. Now that's a hard leap intuitively for most people to make. But the reality is, and you'll hear Mike say this all the time, we can't begin to deal with those issues without very rapid learning speeds and adaptation speeds among not only the business community and the financial community, but among communities and citizens. And that can only happen if we're in alignment between financial equity and living equity. So.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Neil Zuni. Thank you for waking us up and educating us. I had a question. You had mentioned to go into precious metals. Didn't they, in the 20s, outlaw the private ownership of gold?
Yes.
And how would we protect ourselves from that again?
I know of no way to protect ourselves against confiscation without literally moving your assets offshore and possibly getting a double citizenship or moving your citizenship. And obviously it depends on the laws. I am persuaded, there's a very interesting website called The Money Changers, a guy named Franklin Sanders, who's dealt with a lot of these issues. He's had a lot of fisticuffing with the Department of Justice as well. And what Franklin says, and I think his analysis is right, is he's not concerned with confiscation of gold because in the Great Depression, gold was a very substantial portion, or much more substantial portion of our wealth. What he's concerned about is the confiscation of our pension funds and 401ks and IRAs, and that's what I'm concerned about. Because if you look at the rules and regulations and policies on how that money is increasingly had to be channeled, and the unflexibility and sort of the use of that money in more and more ways to finance the tapeworm, my fear is that the rules and regulations that apply to our 401k and IRA investments and then our corporate pension funds, which have basically been stripped through pumping and dumping stocks, through financial fraud, that they will very subtly and inadvertently confiscate those and more control what we can invest in. So I'm much more concerned with the confiscation of those, but ultimately, the only thing that makes us safe, as you know, is a sound community and a sound legal system and a sound government, which we don't have now. So yes, can they confiscate gold? Yes, absolutely they can. I mean, I'm a person who's had my assets confiscated illegally by criminal means by the Department of Justice, so they can do anything they want.
And on your website, is there a way for I live in the East Bay in Newark, and many of the smaller businesses have a terrible time competing with a Walmart, with a Home Depot and such.
Right.
Is there a plan on your website? Are there plans? How can we help our businesses?
I believe in a community, it first has to start with the customer. For many years, I tried to get the small businessmen to finance a venture fund. And you can read articles on my website that explain how to do, sort of my ideas on how to do that. And that's what we were prototyping when we were stopped. I've come to believe that the small businessman can't do it until the consumer starts to organize. And that's why we're starting with the investment clubs, to help educate the consumer and help the consumer understand the advantages they have of teaming up with small business in a performance where, as a small business service and as an investment, it has to perform. So what I would encourage you to do is, I don't know if you're in the Chamber or Rotary or what your small business organizations are, but I think if I were in your shoes, I would start a conversation with the local business leaders that you trust, and I go back to trust, on on how you can start to re-engineer investment locally to address these problems. So I think you're going to, for it to work in your place, my experience is you're going to need people doing Solari investor circles and seeing their short-term and long best interest by switching their purchases and their investments to successful local business in that place.
And the last part of the first question actually was, you talked about fiat money. I'm sorry, there's an organization, Norfed, that uses real money, real silver. Is that something that you think is a good idea?
I won't go into the details. I think coins, coins are good investments if they're properly done. So I think, well, one at the end of the Great Depression, there were 3,000 community currencies in America. Okay, and community currencies is something that we could all do, whether we back it with water, with our time, with precious there's 1,000 different ways to do it. But one option to start to kickstart some of these things is a community currency, and I would encourage you to start to look into that. Time dollars is one. There are many, many systems. The critical thing in any community is not do you do this thing or that thing, but who. Stop thinking about what questions. Do I do community currencies? Do I do venture funds? Do I do this? What you need to ask is, in any community, 10% of the people in any community are what I call net energy plus. They give more energy than they take. 80% are net energy neutral. They kind of follow around whoever is in charge. They're busy. They're doing something else. And 10% are net energy minus. Now, when I was a little girl growing up in West Philadelphia, if there was any kind of problem in the community, the net energy plus people, an 80-year-old black grandmother and a doctor and you could never tell by looking at them who they were. And the net energy plus people would, go off behind the barn and go, and then arrange for somebody to take the troublemaker behind the barn and say, son, if you don't behave, we're going to cut off your money. There was discipline in an informal sense. And what has happened in American communities is the net energy minus people are running around in charge. The followers are following the net energy minus, and the net energy plus people are being drained. So the way to develop your plan, whether it's in your circle or if you want to do a venture fund with a businessman, is say, I call them the community wizards. Who are the local small business people who are being drained, who are net energy plus, and how do we get control again? I mean, I would start a conspiracy to get control of the resources of the net energy plus people. And from there on in, I'd sneak around. And if you got 10 greengrocers, the plan is different than if you have 10 investment bankers. So the most important thing in the next 30 to 90 days is what gives those 10 people energy. And I would organize everything around increasing the energy to you and the people in your conspiracy.
So you can vote with your dollar every day, but you only vote once a year at the polls. What do you recommend or once every 4 years? How do you recommend dealing with the government? I would guess you would recommend not voting at all from the way you're supporting here, but I want you
Okay.
to say something.
What, every year, do you get a financial statement that shows you the sources and uses of taxes and governmental expenditures contiguous to the area that you vote for political representation? No. Okay, so I used to, when I was the FHA commissioner, I'd get a printout of our defaulted inventory, foreclosed homes. We had 50,000 foreclosed homes when I was FHA commissioner, and I'd fly someplace and I'd go out to that neighborhood and I'd say, well, we have 10 foreclosed homes here, and then I'd look at an empty lot. Okay, and accountability in government, in your political representation, means that you have a map of how all the money works in the world that you walk around and see. Okay, and that is critical to re-engineering how the money works in your place. Now, what have we all done for the last 2 years? Rather than 73,000 neighborhoods, making sure that the money in 73,000 neighborhoods was locked down and under ethical control locally or transparent to those 73,000 neighborhoods in a way that would shut off the black budget money to the Bushes, we all ran around and paid attention to a national election or a global process. And so they were able to lock down control of all the money and the voting machines in 73,000 neighborhoods. Because all political and economic control comes one place at a time. And so while we were all running around worried about the national election, they were all locking up the local money, power, and control. And so what I would encourage, the way to deal with government is if each one of us can start to make the incremental changes in our place to understand the money, change the money, and get really excellent local leadership, then if every one of us does it in our place and then we network place to place, then you start to power shift. Does that make sense?
So focus on voting locally.
Voting locally. In addition, there are huge pots of money. People always say to me, I have no money. And then I go through their sort of resume and I discover they went to Harvard. Well, Harvard has a $19 billion endowment, and as a Harvard alum, you can influence that. Or you're involved in United Way, or you're involved in another charity. There are all these organizations in our lives. And if we take the time, and this is the advantage of coming together in a circle, to understand how the money works around us and in the world that we can influence, there are many, many, many ways that we can influence money just by asking questions. So, I mean, if I don't know who went to Harvard, but Lord, you can save the planet by turning around your university endowment.
One thing that I wanted to just check out is my understanding is that one of the reasons we're in Iraq is that they wanted to start trading, buying oil in euros, and that was violating some of the post-World War II agreement that they would only do it in dollars. And that totally made sense to me, and that the international reserve is in dollars now.
Right.
And that if it goes to euros, then everybody will start calling in their debt. We owe so much money to China and blah, blah. And it sort of makes sense. It seems like it's only fair in a way that if we're going to have this big global economy and there's a downward spiral for wages and American workers at Walmart and so on, American workers at Walmart are going just like Chinese workers, working for less and less wages, and the conditions are going down and down, that eventually the only way for everything to equalize and become fair is if our real estate also goes way down. And then, and I hear people say, oh, real estate's going to be worth only 10 cents on the dollar in another month, according to the
Right.
prediction in May that I had. And I'm wondering, it kind of makes sense that would be the overall globalizing, equalizing trend. And there's a part of me that says, well, that's kind of fair in a way if we're all, except for the oil equation, which has to
Right.
factor in there, because when it's $20 a gallon, you're not going to want to ship your apples from China.
Right.
You're going to start wanting them back grown up in Sonoma County. And so I'm trying to sort of make sense of what do you do? A lot of my friends are saying, sell your house quick while it's worth something. Before you owe like $500,000 on a house, it's worth $100,000 or less.
Well, this is an environment where you want to have diversification. So, for example, if I had a $2 million house and no other assets, then I would feel that, I would not want all my eggs in one basket. Now, let me say, one of my favorite stories is about a couple in England about 20 years ago who decided that life was very risky and the world was crazy. So they did a big study and decided to be safe, they'd move to this remote island called the Falklands, bought a big house, and then, literally, several weeks later, the missile hit it and they were gone. So you never know. I mean, the idea of diversification, I'm a great believer in diversification, is, you can put money into 10 different sound things and you never know what happens. So I'm a great believer in diversification. I would say that it is incredibly important in whatever we do. I'm a great believer in intention, and when you put out an intention of fear, you attract the tapeworm.
Right.
And when you put out an intention of fear, money tends to go away from you. Okay? So to me, the way to attract money and the way to deal with money is from a state of calm. And what I'm hoping to do with these conversations is to help people reduce anxiety, because there are ways of dealing with this complexity. One of the reasons I want to start circles is because I've tried to do this all by myself, and I can't. It's too complicated. And I can see scenarios where houses will go up and houses will go down. I would really encourage you, though, the theory that jobs are moving abroad because it's more productive is a complete and utter lie. I just want to make that clear again. When you destroy the intellectual capital of a country's manufacturing capability and move it in abroad in a way that they have, you're not creating wealth, you're destroying wealth. And I would really encourage you to read 2 articles that I wrote. One is called The Story of Edgewood Technology Services. In 1994, my company took a plan to Congress and the White House and said, we're moving all the jobs abroad. Let's re-engineer skills. Let's put computer learning centers in communities, incubate small business, and produce phenomenal increases of productivity in a way that lowers tax dollars. And they said no. And I tell the story in Edgewood Technology Services. There was a concerted decision, rather than increase skills and improve workforce skills and make equity financing available to incubate small business, there was a decision to increase debt and decrease small business health. And that was a plan, and it was concerted. And the question is, and that was done by the Clinton administration, that was not done by the Bush administration. Those were Clinton administration decisions, and I can document and prove it. It was intentional, and that's a very important thing for everyone to understand, because under common law, there is a very serious argument to be made that if a lender makes a big mortgage when they know that their syndicate of investors is planning on moving all the jobs abroad, that is a fraudulently induced debt for which the borrower may not be liable. That is financial fraud. Has anybody seen the movie Rob Roy? He borrows money, the guy he borrows money from, his factor business agent arranged to steal the money. Then the question is, does Rob Roy owe the money back? He got tricked in a fraud. So I would really encourage you to read Edgewood. There's another story on piracy on the Delaware about a destruction of a great shipbuilding company in Philadelphia. But it's we are moving jobs abroad, but it's not because it's more productive. It's because it's more productive for the tapeworm.
Well, right, exactly.
Right.
Obviously. And so how do you sort of survive unless you, I mean, it's just, sometimes I just feel really at survival level because I don't have a lot of investments.
Right.
And
You got more than me.
I'm sure, yeah, I just got your story. I didn't hear that before. But I wonder what you see the timeline is, because it seems to me inevitable that we will come to a place where the U.S. economy is measured by its fundamentals and not by force.
Not
we can't
necessarily.
sustain the
Orwell
force.
wrote a book called 1984.
Yeah.
And he envisioned a world where the dollar doesn't fall and the bubble continues all the way down.
I guess I have more hope than that. That we.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
I would
do
rather
I.
see the dollar fall. How long is it going to take? What's the timeline that you see? That's what I'm trying to.
The
sort
Buddha says, with your thoughts, you invent your world.
Yeah.
This is all being invented by us. And what I'm saying is we have the power to reinvent it because they are few and we are many.
I'd like to introduce Eliana Obadia, who is the Minister for the Light of the World Ministries in Fairfax, who's going to close tonight. Eliana.
Good evening, everybody. Catherine asked me to bring the focus at the end into the domain of where we all connect with living spiritual forces, and that may mean something different for every single person in this world. I've heard a lot of things tonight, and I think I want to really just highlight and focus the fact that what we're being called to here through this woman's vision and those who are working with her is radical practical action that's based on the desire not just to protect or even maximize our own interests, but to see the entire world raised up in blessing. You know? And that when that is the foundation for what we're doing, all of the divine help that there is available to give us the courage we need, the insights we need, the protection that we need will become available. And so I would like to call on everyone in this audience and in the other room to actually just take a moment right now, if you will, to just close your eyes and you find that place where you are connected in your core with the divine force that has created and sustains and blesses all beings on this earth. And first and foremost, to give thanks for that. To give thanks for all forms of life on this planet. And to ask that your goodwill and your heart be a blessing. So that life on this earth is not only sustainable, but that it reaches the peak that it was meant to reach on this planet. And that you can commit yourselves in your own way to finding those things that you're called to do to contribute into that. And to call for a blessing onto all your brothers and sisters, that anything that might be in the way of that can just be dissolved away. That we can reach for the highest. That the divine wants us to succeed and to thrive. And that we can be the demonstration of that which we want to see happening in this world. And I ask you to join me in blessing now specifically for Catherine and her team, who've just shown so much courage and so much determination and the willingness to risk and to be pioneers so that we can do the seemingly impossible and make it a model that can go all over the earth and accomplish what we all want so much in our hearts. So together we call down divine protection on Catherine personally, on all her associates, and all the ventures that will come out of these ideas that are seeded not just into your thinking, but into your very spirit. And we ask that that blessing go out into the world, into every person, to every life form, to bring about heaven on earth. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.